Hello. Hello, hello, hello. What's going on? Aw, Zane, are you bathing again? It's not even Saturday night. Well, hello, Miss Kelly. How is the great world treating you? Be careful. Zane's probably bathing and doesn't want anybody to see him. Hello, Miss Shirley. Whoo-hoo! I got a house full tonight. See who all sticks with me. Righty. Ooh, Laura. Damn it, girl. That's a hot picture. How's everybody doing tonight? Are we staying warm? I'm about to freeze my ass off. Ice cold. Ice cold. Where's what I'm looking for? Does that take me back to where I need to go? Maybe I need to do this. I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't know. I'm lost. Anybody else get lost? I'm lost all the time. I'm in a singing mood. What the crap? I don't sing. I don't sing. I just make noise. How's everybody doing? Hello, Miss Ray. Are we ready? Ready, Freddy's? The call is here. We can start. Yay! Oh, golly. Bummers, I'm cold. There. Is everybody doing all right tonight? Why does he keep doing what I don't really ask it to do? Edit. There it is. Oh, cowboy football. Yeah, baby. Two of my favorites. Stars over abundance. Oops. Is it Shanna? Did I say that right last time? Is it Shanna? Shana? I'm doing it like a Shannon, only with a A, you know. No, yeah. Is everybody having a good day? Come on, somebody. Talk to me. Tell me what's going on in your life. Did everybody have a good Thanksgiving? Those that are on this side of the pond. All right, Shanna, good. I had one of my best friends, and she was even in my wedding back in high school. She was my best friend in high school, and then she was in my wedding. Her name was Shanna, only she spelled it with one N. And so I wanted to make sure. And then I have a girl that I work with. Her name is Shanna, and she has 2 A's. Shaana. So I just wanted to make sure I got it right. Gots to get it right. Another minute or so, and then I'll start the reading since everybody's here, it looks like. Hello, Teddy dear. How are you, Teddy Bear? That's what I want. Alrighty. So, we are reading Stars Over Abundance, the Abundance Series, Book 4 by Shanna Swenson. You guys will remember I read her story, and this was the beginning, the prequel to this series. I read it a few weeks ago, the story about the suicide. And so this is book 4 in that series. That was the prequel. And if you'll remember, in it, we talked about Buck Jenkins. And correct me, Miss Shanna, sorry. Buck's mom was the one that died in the prequel, correct? So, this story is about him. And it's hot. Jerry, I hope you took your Viagra, baby, because you're going to need it tonight. Alright. To my readers, I'm going to read the forward. That way, give everybody a little more time to get on here. That's what I thought. Thought I was remembering that correctly, but I've slept since then, so I just wanted to make sure. To my readers, this book is the byproduct of a scene completely unplanned that happened during book 3, Escape from Abundance. I didn't even know it was going to happen until I'd already written it, and once I did, I knew that the series would have to continue because Buck and Vivian needed their very own book too. What follows is the story, along with the stories of 2 other characters that needed a happily ever after as well. Enjoy your trip back to abundance and stay tuned for a sneak peek at the back of this book into the abundance finale, Savannah story, book 5, Abundancy Legacy. Okay, needless to say, we're not going to be getting that far. I think we can do oh well, I don't need that to play anyway. But I need to, okay, make sure. I think we can do the prologue and chapter 1. I read that much anyway, and I was like, okay, I think that'll get everybody hooked. Oh, let me show you the cover. My bad. Does anybody ever say that anymore? I'm so old school about stuff. Alright, there's the cover. She's in a hot gray and satin and chiffon and sequins gray dress, and he's in a black tux with a top hat, or a cowboy hat, sorry. I just got through eating supper. I think I have food in my teeth. And Jerry, don't tell me if I do. I don't want to know. What is up with this? There we go. Prologue. Okay. And let's get started. Vivian Alexander sighed heavily and looked out onto the crowded dance floor of the luxurious, austere hotel, one of Dallas's finest. She stood at the bar sipping a dirty martini with extra olives. Wearing only a ridiculously expensive black lace Dulce and Gabbana dress, silver heels that were far more uncomfortable than the outrageous price tag claimed, and a matching silver comb that had been used to sweep her long sandy blonde hair up into the French twist. I'm trying to move this so that I don't get sidetracked by... I just want to see your comments, not everybody else's. And of course, I'm going to mess that all up. Okay. There we go. Okay. She'd been dreading this charity ball all week, but her manager had insisted she go. Jill Bradley had been her manager for the last 12 years, and she'd been a good one, so when she told Vivian to do something, she did it, even if she grumbled insistently about it along the way, kind of like when Nina tells me to do something. But Vivian had actually been right this time. This charity ball was nothing more than a stuffy charade for a bunch of pompous jerks. It was all about appearances and money. That's why she'd wanted to avoid it. Helping Heroes had received a rather large donation from her and all the hundreds of other celebrities in attendance. Alright, I'm cold, so I'm gonna be freaking yawning. My apologies ahead of time. Vivian felt her contribution was more than enough of a bargaining chip, but no, Jill asserted that Viv absolutely had to make an appearance, albeit it be a short one. Jill was accurate, of course. After all, it was a good exposure and showed Vivian's commitment to the cause of donating and volunteering her time with underprivileged children. Plus, Vivian had been... I'm going to have to find me a heater to bring back here. Plus, Vivian had been super engrossed in her work lately. What with multiple films and projects, and she had not graced a gala or event in quite some time, so of course she found it prudent to acquiesce. The Ponderosa Ballroom was indeed a lovely one, with its 50-foot ceilings and sparkling, cascading, hand-cut crystal chandeliers. There were ice sculptures and bubbling marble fountains. Cocktails were overflowing, and hors d'oeuvres were being passed around by waiters in white suits and black tie and bow ties. The ballroom was dimly lit with circling blue and gold disco balls, and music streamed out of the speakers. Poppy classical from the quartet played nearby. It wasn't unlike any other charity ball Viv had attended. It wasn't unlike any other charity ball Viv had ever attended. Although she looked like $1,000,000, Vivian felt as out of place as her here as a vegan at a Texas barbecue. But she plastered on the perfect smile that had made her famous, nodded to the stars she knew, and tried to keep to herself as much as possible. She had wanted to quickly ride this facade out and go up to her room within the hour. Maybe she'd settle into the oversized jetted jacuzzi tub with a glass of wine and simply enjoy the quiet for a change, or cuddle up and read the spicy romance novel Jill had thrown into her bag to relax. I need a jetted pool so that I can, or at least a soaking tub, so that I can read from there. Till my life reads from there. Yeah. Meanwhile, like I dump my stuff in the tub. Vivian Alexander was an extrovert through and through. She'd always enjoyed being the center of attention and absolutely loved being an actress. Over the last 15 years, she'd gotten used to being photographed, interviewed, stalked, followed by the media for every little move she made, and never getting an ounce of privacy to herself. She had literally lived in the spotlight almost every single second of every single day. But one thing she couldn't stand was phoniness, faking it for appearance's sake. The founders of Helping Heroes was nothing but a gang of high and mighty corporate bigots, and Viv couldn't stomach them. Vivian remembered that she was there for the kids and forced herself to move back into the crowd. It wouldn't help for photographers to come around and see her standing off to herself, appearing to be sulking. She could just see the headline now. Hollywood starlet found pouting at charity ball. Is this a new beau? Or is it a new beau? Or is it simply feeling the effects of middle age? Vivian had seen a similar tabloid already. She was 35 years old now and felt her biological clock ticking ever louder as each day passed. Leave it to every media outlet to capitalize on the one shortcoming Vivian had so far, her lack of a husband and children. It had been an embarrassing lull. In the interview with Naomi Wiley, one of the top talk show hosts on primetime TV, and she asked Vivian when she planned to finally settle down. Viv hadn't expected the random question. It was completely off topic for one thing and highly personal for another. Vivian had been so busy with her career, she hadn't had time to think about settling down. She'd absorbed herself in the Kinson children since she had none of her own and was too busy spoiling them and trying to keep up with their goings on. She hadn't really been looking for love, not to mention the last two men she dated had been total asshats. I used that term today. I called somebody an asshat. Oh wait, that was my ex-husband. Yeah, that's who I called an asshat. Anyway, she waved to Leonard Parker, a well-known director and former producer for one of her movies, Destiny of Promise, and greeted Trent Mooney, her former co-star. They talked for a bit as he introduced his wife, Jennifer, and she began to tell Vivian about their new baby. Vivian groaned internally. It wasn't that she didn't love babies, but it seemed the entire universe was trying to tell her something right now she wasn't quite ready to hear. When she could finally pull herself away from the conversation that seemed to last 10 years, she moved towards the frame of the French door and grabbed a glass of champagne from one of the passing trays, replacing her empty martini glass in its place. She downed it, the bubbles burning in her throat. That wasn't going to do it. She headed back to the bar. Martini, extra dirty, Vivian murmured to the handsome young bartender, clad in a black button-down shirt, who'd served her the same thing not just 10 minutes prior. He nodded and gave her a grin. He had beautiful ebony skin and blonde hair with big chocolate brown eyes, not unlike Vivian's. Rough night? You could say that, Vivian flirted and winked. Once she handed the martini over, she sipped it and immediately turned to avoid his eyes. He was giving her a look she was all too familiar with. Not that she wouldn't enjoy a hot night with a young stud such as himself. It had been a 4-month dry spell for her after all. But he was genuinely far too young for her, and God forbid that was the last thing she needed for the media to see at this moment in her life. A young college-aged kid leaving her hotel room in the walk of shame, especially after she'd been called out for being middle-aged. She thanked him, handed over a generous cash tip from her black Michael Kors wristlet, smiled at him, and walked forward. She froze in her tracks at the sight of a face she knew well but had surprisingly never been formally introduced to. It was the black cowboy hat that sat on his head, his trademark, that made him immediately recognizable. Howdy, ma'am. Vivian shivered at the deep Texas drawl. Howdy yourself, cowboy. Vivian murmured back and grinned playfully at the blonde-haired, blue-eyed sex god before her. She'd felt the mind-numbing effects of the alcohol start to move through her system as she extended her hand to him. I reckon you and I have ever officially met.
I'm Buck Jenkins. Vivian Alexander, her voice sultry rasped out. He took her hand and brought it to his lips, rubbing her knuckles ever so lightly with their full softness, before tenderly kissing her prickling flesh. She gasped internally and bit into her bottom lip. Her pulse quickened, and she almost moaned aloud. Her night had just gotten exciting. I see you're enjoying this shindig about as much as I am. He kept her hand as he brought it down in front of them. Glad to see I'm not the only one who's bored. Yeah, this is about as much fun as a sexless frat party. Vivian laughed genuinely for the first time all night, as she gazed back into his ruggedly handsome face with his square jaw and dazzling blue eyes. She took in his black Versace suit and bow tie. His muscular body filled it out so nicely. Buck Jenkins had been a defensive end in the NFL for almost 20 years. He played for the San Antonio Stallions his entire career and finally retired about a year ago. He headed home to Abundance, Buck's Buckaroos for both disabled children and cancer research. I skipped the line somewhere. I got new glasses and they got a bifocal in them. Shh. He headed home to Abundance not long after he'd announced his retirement and started a foundation, Buck's Buckaroos, for both disabled children and cancer research. He'd been out of the spotlight as of the last couple of months, even though he started to dabble in the movie business. She suddenly wondered where he'd gone and what he'd been up to. Well, I've always wanted my very own damsel in distress.
The promise in his words made her center throb. In that moment, she wanted to know what this gorgeous cowboy tasted and felt like naked against her skin. I didn't realize the auditions were open, she cooed.
They certainly are now. His eyebrows went up. Want to dance?
Absolutely. He turned and pulled her away from her hiding spot at the bar area and into the crowd of rich and famous people. He led them onto a hardwood dance floor where the gold, blue, and white light shimmered across his broad back and all around them like stars bursting in the night sky. Vivian smiled as he spun her around and into his hard muscle chest, one of his big arms encircling her waist, his hand taking the other of hers that didn't hold the martini. Her free hand clasped his, and she admired the size of his palm and the length of his long fingers. She'd always been a sucker for big-muscled men. Her young, fleeting infatuation with Jack Kenson, although years ago, probably had everything to do with that. Buck's head leaned down to look into her face, and she gulped suddenly at the intensity reflecting in his eyes.
How is it that we're best friends with the same exact people, yet I've never had the pleasure of meeting you until now?
Vivian shrugged. Good question. She'd been to Abundance, Buck's hometown, many times to see the Kensons for the kids' birthdays, holidays, and get-togethers, yet never once had she ever seen this man face to face. They, of course, lived different kinds of lives. He was a pro football player, and she was a movie star. She never got an off-season, whereas Buck had gotten to spend about half of his year off the field as on. She traveled constantly and was always on the go, and the few opportunities she got to spend time in Abundance were short and sweet. Just a few days, then it was back to the grindstone.
Well, I deeply regret now that I didn't make it a point to seek you out, he murmured.
Vivian deeply regretted that herself as his big smile took her breath away. She scolded herself slightly as her hips swayed with his to the harmonic sounds of violin, cello, and piano that beckoned them from the subwoofers overhead.
Never had classical music sounded or felt quite so good as it did in this moment. She was well aware of the type of reputation Buck Jenkins had. Everyone was. Hell, this was show business. Being in the limelight assured that the entire world knew as much as possible about every star there was to know. He was a womanizer, and as much as her brain tried to remind herself of that fact, her heart was floating on a puffy pink cloud that hovered just in view of his sexy self. "You're a graceful dancer for a man of your size," she purred as she looked up into his gorgeous eyes.
"Sit that empty glass down and I'll show you graceful."
Maybe it was those perfectly shaped eyebrows that raised in challenge. But again, Vivian found herself biting her lip at the power of his eyes and his words and his hands. Gosh, he was so hot. No wonder women dropped their panties in his presence. He was one handsome and charming devil. She was going to ride on this wild cowboy before the night was through. She knew beyond the shadow of a doubt. She'd gotten a little taste of one before, a real one, Tad Walters, but they'd only made out, and it had been somewhat clumsy. Well, of course it had. They'd both been young and amateurish. Vivian could see there wasn't 1 ounce of clumsiness in the man before her. He was older than her, more experienced, and a keen sexual prowess oozed every pore of his skin. Every move he made was deliberate and planned. He knew exactly what he was doing to her and her body. He steered them ever closer to the edge of the dance floor with slow, easy movements until Buck plucked the glass from her fingers and dropped it easily onto a passing tray. He gave her a crooked grin that made her insides quiver.
"You know the tango, Viv?"
"Do I?" she stated with confidence, and his sexy smile turned downright naughty. Her skin bristled with anticipation. Buck queued up the string quartet next to them, and before Vivian knew it, they were in the middle of the classic Latin American dance. He moved lithely with intent, and she kept sync with him as he led her into a heart-pounding, mind-blowing show for all to see. Their audience had moved aside, eager to see the dance probably few of them knew and even fewer had ever seen performed live. It was graceful and beautiful and intensely sensual as he spun her and dipped her and carried her away, her legs wrapping around him and lunging out at the appropriate times in the style and rhythm of the music. His hands moved expertly over her, caressing her as a lover would, as their feet flew swiftly in cadence to the rhythm. They ended with an erotic dip, her extended back splayed over his big thigh, one hand cupping her neck, the other gripping her extended leg, his nose pressed to hers. It was one of the most sexual experiences she'd ever had outside of her bedroom, and her entire body was tingling and fully aroused as she breathlessly gazed into the sky blue eyes burning deep in lust into hers. She gave him a sultry smile as he brought them upright, then flung her arm out as they both bent into a bow. For all their pretentious audience knew, it all had been well rehearsed and acted out just for their amusement, but Vivian comprehended Buck's intentions all too well. They were both performers after all, and she had just auditioned, passed his test, and had been given the part. A part in a very carnal game, a test of wills and dominance. Buck was a player after all, and he played to win. He pulled her back into his arms for a slow dance as the shock and awe of their explicit dance wore off from the onlookers. He gave her a big hearty laugh that made Vivian giddy.
"Now that was fun. We'll be the talk of the ball for sure. Hope you don't mind."
He trailed off as his eyes slid over her. I live for the spotlight, as I'm sure you do. It wasn't a lie. Vivian was used to it, and Buck had apparently not gotten enough of it in the prime of his stardom.
Someone needed to give these people something to talk about tomorrow, he winked. They see I'm not leaving here empty-handed tonight.
Is that so? His arrogance amused her. Even if it was true, he knew he had her now. Line, hook, and sinker. Well, now that you've seen what I can do on the dance floor, just wait till you see what I can do in the bedroom, he whispered provocatively into her ear as his long fingers toyed with the shape of her collarbone. She fought the urge to moan aloud as her heart pounded in her ears, as much from his touch as from the dance they'd just performed. What makes you think I'm that type of girl, Buck? You only just met me.
Don't kid yourself, Viv. His mouth lowered to replace his fingers, and she almost whimpered. We've known each other for a long time.
It was somewhat true. After all, they'd heard all about one another over the expanse of so many years. But that didn't change the fact that she didn't know him like she should before hauling herself to bed with him. She tried to come to her senses then, even as his tongue lapped at her pulse point, drowning her in overwhelming and all-encompassing desire. Bug, she cried breathlessly and pulled away suddenly. His eyes were dark as they flew up to hers. He was a physical warrior, used to getting what he wanted with aggression and strength, and he didn't like not having dominance over her. She smiled as much to herself as to him and cocked an eyebrow. I have to go bid on a painting for the auction first.
Well, in that case, I'll accompany you.
They moved from the dance floor then, her arm through Buck's. One of their ostentatious hosts began a speech as they entered a separate room off to the west of the massive ballroom. It was set up gallery style with paintings on the walls illuminated with tubular lights shining down on them. Buck stopped at one of the more colorful paintings and grimaced at it.
They call this art?
He scoffed and shook his head. Well, some people call it that, Vivian corrected, indicating she wasn't one of them.
Not all people can be as amazing as our little Savannah, I reckon.
She is quite talented, isn't she? Vivian smiled, thinking about the sweet 13-year-old girl that was more like a blood relative than not, and how her landscapes put the viewer right into the action. They walked slowly, deliberately, as their eyes skirted over each painting. Other couples passed by, whispering quietly in the alcove-like room as if they were in a library instead of a charity gala. Buck stopped at one particular scene, and Vivian almost laughed. It was a sexually primed painting of a knight set for battle with a helmet in his hand, clinging to his lover, a woman scantily clad, one breast exposed, with her head thrown back in the throes of both passion and anguish as his lips descended to her throat. Tears flowed down her face, and the knight's brows were drawn into a profound sadness. The painting made Vivian uncomfortable. The sorrow emanating from it tore through her, but Buck smiled provocatively as he only saw the sexuality that the scene drew forth.
Now this one is worth the price tag.
100,000, huh?
Chump change.
He murmured and grabbed the pen from the stand in front of the painting, writing down his bid and placing it in the wooden box in front of them. Your reputation precedes you, Buck Jenkins.
I'll take that as a compliment, Miss Alexander.
It is Miss, isn't it? Vivian laughed. Indeed. I have yet to have a man who's worthy of the title. So yes, it's Miss. She didn't miss the challenge on his face as he cocked his brow and his eyes descended down her body, stopping to look at her most private parts tightly wrapped in the form-fitting gown of hers.
Well, it would appear that tonight's your lucky night then.
He looked around quickly, seeing if anyone was watching, before pulling her roughly into his arms and backing her against the wall. She gasped as his head tilted. His beautiful eyes focused on her mouth, and she gulped as the sexuality of it made her melt.
And when I say night, I mean all night.
She shivered at that, but tried not to let him see it.
What you really mean is one night, and we both know it.
Someone had to say it. His eyes drifted back to hers and lingered there for what felt like ages before he responded.
I don't put labels on anything, Viv. Not until I know what it is, anyway.
That was fair, she surmised. After all, he hadn't said,
yes, this will be a one-night stand.
It made her feel a little better, but her heart had been split in two too many times before. She'd dated many celebrities over the years and had let a few get close enough to suffer the heartbreak when they told her she was too career-driven and work-obsessed, as if she didn't have time for love in her life, and that simply wasn't true. She guessed it hadn't really been love if she could simply let them walk away without a fight. Love. Now there was a word that was an enigma to her. But looking up into the handsome face of Bobby Buck Jenkins, she suddenly wanted to take the risk, no matter the consequences. Chances of a lifetime only came around once. She licked the lips Buck's eyes seemed so riveted on and sighed. Let's go find my painting. He stepped back then, looking down almost regretfully as if he were disappointed, his cowboy hat shielding his eyes. Her hand moved to his chest and she angled her head up to his, her breath mere inches from his face. Then we can see whether your bedroom tricks are worth all your bragging. She walked over to a seascape scene then, as she had heard him clear his throat and follow, and she tried not to laugh. An angry wave crashed against a cliff where a red and white lighthouse sat glowing brilliantly against a storm-darkened sky.
Now that's depressing,
Buck grumbled and wrapped a bulky arm around her waist, pulling her easily into his side. She balked and looked up at him, but he was dead serious. I completely disagree, she asserted. It represents the beacon of hope in a dismal obscurity.
Poetic words for a thespian.
Big words for a dumb jock. Buck just laughed in response and she nudged her hip against his. You really don't like it?
Nope. Look. The poor sailboat is about to sink into the abyss.
He pointed into the obsidian darkness of the sea at the sailboat that indeed teetered on the very edge of fate. Vivian shrugged.
Oh, you don't care, huh?
A small price to pay for the beauty of light. Besides, you don't know if it's going to sink or not. It's called hope.
Ah, the perpetual dreamer. I admire that.
His generous smile proved his words. Vivian tilted her head, appraising the painting with her eyes. It's rather poignant. You guys need big words. And symbolic, and I'm sorry, but far less depressing than yours. Vivian moved to submit her bid.
Depressing? My painting is sexy.
Not if you look beyond the bare breasts of its protagonist, she countered and looked up at him. Bulk belted out a big laugh then.
I sincerely apologize, ma'am. I'm just a bit distracted at the moment.
His eyes came back to her breast as she felt her nipples harden beneath the sheer fabric of her gown. She gulped as he turned to face her, his hand rising from her waist to the top of her rib cage, just beneath her left breast, close enough to tease, but without touching. Vivian felt electricity spike through her center as his eyes came back to hers, now dark again with desire.
I've seen enough. I'm ready to appraise something besides artwork. How about you?
Chapter 1. How's everybody liking it? Everybody doing good? We lost the author, I see. That's alright. We still having fun, ain't that right, ladies? Vivian used her key card to unlock the penthouse suite and opened the door. Buck followed diligently, closing the door behind him.
Hot damn, he called out, then whistled. This is fancy.
Vivian laughed heartily as she moved over to the bar to set her wristlet down. We both know you've stayed in a penthouse before. Don't be so gosh, she teased.
There you go again, using them big words on me.
He sighed and feigned. There she is. He sighed in feigned exasperation, getting another laugh out of her as she grabbed the chilling bottle of champagne that had been delivered just a few moments ago upon Buck's request in the lobby. Want to do the honors? She cocked her eyebrow at him as he approached.
This is good stuff. Right, this is the good stuff right here.
He clarified and removed the wire. Miss Audra, I saw you there. You and Vincy and Shirley. And then I see where Nicole's still here too. Her little thing's just not up there.
This is the good stuff right here.
He clarified and removed the wire, aimed the bottle in the opposite direction, and popped the cork. Champagne spewed from the bottle and ran onto the plush white carpet.
What are we celebrating again? He winked.
I don't know. She turned, looking seductively up at his big frame and the dusting of blonde chest hair peeking out at her where he'd unbuttoned his top 2 buttons on the elevator. How about fame, fortune, or even us? How about to your hometown and the family we both love so much? How about the single life, middle age? Now there's a word you and I have in common have come to know well, she remarked as she grabbed up 2 champagne flutes and handed them over.
Ah, Vivian Alexander, Hollywood starlet / closet cynic.
Cynic. There we go. Sorry, she frowned, hoping she hadn't ruined the mood. Buck just shook his head and smiled, filling the flutes halfway. He set the bottle aside, and Vivian handed him his champagne. He clinked his glass against hers.
Here's to new paths.
Vivian smiled at them. I like that. She brought her glass to her lips, watching him as he did the same. She swallowed the bubbly, semi-sweet, and not too tart champagne.
It's my favorite one, and I'm not a big fan of champagne.
Me either, but this one is the exception.
Here's to the heads we turned tonight.
He brought his glass back to hers. And here's to the news coverage of it in the morning. She took another sip of her champagne as Buck downed his. Buck chuckled a deep booming laugh.
Oh, Viv, you worry too much. What do you care anyway?
I don't. It was going to be the young bartender before you came along. I'm certain of it.
Robbing the cradle now, huh?
Buck teased and followed her into the spacious den.
I'm sure we could make room for him too if you're into menage.
Nope. I only want one man at a time. Thank you very much. Vivian smirked at him as she sat on the big couch, and he moved to sit right next to her.
I'm enough for you anyway, Viv. Trust me.
He winked a dazzling blue eye at her.
I'm not sorry I interrupted you and Junior, though.
You shouldn't be. He was so young.
I doubt he even had I doubt he could even fathom all the things I plan to do with you.
He placed their flutes on the coffee table before them. Oh, pray tell. She felt her tummy flutter and her body began to hum from her center.
Why tell when I can show?
Buck moved her closer. His broad chest brushed hers as she turned it to him. His smoothly shaven face moved in towards hers. His gorgeous baby blue eyes drank her in. Viv gulped, for she had never been this aroused by a simple look before. She could only imagine the pleasure coming her way as he gave her a crooked grin. She licked the lips he was intent on and inhaled the scent of him, sweet and earthy, masculine and spicy, clean and soapy, leather and whiskey. His muscular presence oozed mind-blowing sex and all the things cardinal. And Vivian knew she was about to be in for the ride of her life. His moves were calculated, like that of a cougar stalking out his prey. As his big palm cupped her cheek and his face tilted, his plump lips but a breath away. She thought she could die from anticipation as his sweet breath hit her face and his other hand came to her waist. Her eyelids fluttered shut as he closed the distance between them, and she felt his soft lips move gently over hers, brushing feather light, barely touching. She whimpered, wanting more. A strong hand gripped her hip then and lifted her, pulling her onto his lap. Her legs splayed instinctively as she straddled him, her tight dress inching up her naked thighs. Buck's hard chest bumped her breast as his mouth covered hers, and she got the kiss she'd been waiting for. A passionate, sexy kiss that promised incredible things as his lips opened. A strong, curious tongue expertly invaded her mouth. The eager muscle curled and stroked her own, and within minutes had her panting and arching her hips against his as his hands moved to her bare thighs. Rising swirls of heart desire licked at her center, and she ached to have him then and there.
Vivian,
he practically growled as he thrust his erection against her, and his mouth moved to her neck. His big palm cupped her breast then, and he squeezed her there, testing the firmness as he sucked at her throat. Using his teeth and tongue in such an erotic way that she thought she might orgasm before he was ever inside her. She felt his hands come to the latch behind her neck, and she realized just how much she wanted Buck's big hands on his breast. On her breast, her body, all of her. Yes, Buck, yes. Vivian cried as she began unbuttoning his shirt, peeling his big arms from his jacket. She wanted to see his battle-worn body, feel those hard muscular muscles of his bare beneath her palms. The clasp on her halter dress gave, and she jerked it down, displaying her breast for his eyes to see. He must have liked what he saw, for he moaned and his head bent as he took one of her puckered nipples into his hot mouth. She murmured as pleasure spiked through her, and she felt her center dampen as his hand moved to grip her bottom. His tongue and mouth almost became her undoing as he suckled her and teased her aching flesh. His hand moved then, and as he loved one breast with his mouth, he loved the other with his deft thumb and fingers. Then he switched. Vivian was panting, her orgasm building, and her cries grew more desperate as she ground her hips against his, wanting to feel his naked sex against her own. Suddenly, she was being turned, and he felt her back hit the couch as his hips moved along with hers. She was suddenly positioned beneath him, his thighs hitting the back of hers as he settled between her legs. Buck grinned at her like a shit-eating possum.
My feast has only just begun, darling.
Her response was stymied as he inched the tight dress up to her waist, and his head fell once again. Oh, God, Buck, she cried out as his mouth delicately nibbled at her inner thigh, his big palms splaying her naked thighs apart. His teeth grazed her flesh, and he kissed her tenderly there before nipping at it again. She practically whimpered as his fingers parted her. Let's see just how sweet Vivian Alexander really is. He grated then, his tongue licked at her wet center as his hands moved beneath her to grip her bottom, pulling her sex closer to his seeking mouth. He began to kiss and lick and suck at her tender flesh as if it were her mouth he was making out with, and she found herself gasping and shuddering and letting herself be carried away. He would give a little, then pull away just before she could get too worked up, planting little soft kisses on the insides of her thighs before his hot mouth returned to her hungry sex. It was erotic and frustrating, and just as his thick fingers slowly entered her and she felt so close to oblivion, he pulled them quickly out before she could climax. Buck's eyes were drunk with desire as he sat back on his haunches, looking her over, a man satisfied with his work. Vivian's breathing was erratic as her hands moved to his chest, tearing the last of his buttons open on his shirt before falling to the hard, restrained sex extending before her, and she gasped. He shivered as she squeezed and pulled on his clothed erection for a moment before looking back up into his sparkling blue eyes. "Take me, Buck." In an instant, she was easily scooped up into his arms as he stood, and she straddled him once again, her legs clinging to his hips, her arms wrapped around his neck, and her mouth sought his. He moaned as her tongue plunged in, and he walked them blindly to the bed. Vivian gave a oomph as she landed back to the mattress and felt bereft as he left her side quickly to remove his pants and rip the shirt off his arms. She peeled the dress from her waist and threw it across the room as she turned to appreciate his gloriously naked body. Each hard muscle rippled as he breathed in and out. She admired the broadness of his chest and shoulders, the scattering light fan of blonde hair that covered his chest and down his belly, his tapering hips, and the impressive, thick, rock-hard sex jutting out at her. Vivian moaned as she took Buck's presence in. He was big, bigger than any man she'd ever been with before. Of course, she'd been with muscular celebrities prior to Buck Jenkins, and ones who were more cut than him, but never quite as broad in stature. Buck was a defensive player after all. His job was to take down the quarterback. He was a physical warrior, and she was about to go into sexual warfare with him. He gave her the panties-shucking grin of his before putting his knee up on the bed. He crawled over to her, slowly, deliberately building up the mind-blowing sexual tension between them as his hands reached her ankles. He jerked her down into his embrace as she gasped, and he chuckled. His plump lips found hers again as he positioned his giant body gently over hers. She felt his erection push into her thigh, and her hands went to his sexy chest as she fiercely kissed him back, her palms tracing the indentation of muscles there. She could have gotten off just by touching him as her hands moved lower down his massive, manly torso. He groaned and winced as her eyes found his sex again, and his big palm cupped her breast, squeezing it. She cried out, and her head flew back wantonly when his mouth sought the tender flesh of her neck, and his thumb grazed her nipple. Buck growled. He had had enough torture as he gripped her hips and positioned himself between her legs then, sitting back on his haunches. Yes, I want you so much, Buck. Please, Vivian murmured as she began pulling at his bulging cock, his fingers opening her. Suddenly, Buck's body went rigid. Fuck, he yelled, and Vivian's eyes jerked up to his. He sighed heavily and pulled the cowboy hat off, throwing a hand through his dark hair, his dark blonde locks, before once again replacing the hat. What is it? She asked. I don't have a rubber, he said regretfully. But God, I need to bury myself inside you, Viv. He grumbled, then swore again, frowning as his eyes moved over her body as if she were some delicious treat for him to devour. Vivian bit into her bottom lip. How could she have been so careless? Her hand shifted from his member to his muscular thigh, and she looked down, thoughtfully, then back up at him. I'm on birth control, she offered, but knew it wasn't the only reason he required a condom. Buck hesitated only for a moment before he said, fuck it. Suddenly, he was guiding himself into her, and she was crying out as his girthy sex filled her. Her back arched, and she gripped his broad shoulders as he stretched her, inch by tormenting inch. Vivian hadn't realized just how aroused he had made her until she was screaming his name in orgasm just moments after he had started thrusting inside her. She basked in the slap of his large, muscular thighs against her own as his hips plunged and withdrew ever so slowly, riding the wave of her orgasm. He chuckled and pulled back to look at her, restraining his natural instincts for a moment. Been a while for you, huh, darling? She narrowed her eyes at him as she squeezed her internal muscles around his stilly erection. Every single one of you did that. You squeezed those internal muscles when I said that. I know I did. He moaned and his eyes darkened. Shut up and ride me, cowboy, she smirked. He returned it then lunged hard, making her cry out again. His body became a rigid missile, seeking nothing but rapture as he stroked her with his sex and hands and mouth. His thrusts were perfectly paced, giving much and taking nothing as he loved her body unlike it ever been loved before. Soon she was falling apart in his arms again. This time, intense spasms racked her as she gripped his body and her head fell to his shoulder, where she lightly bit into his bulky bicep, whimpering her as her orgasm took her. Buck continued his deep, caressing thrust as she came back to earth, his groans becoming more frequent, and she could tell he was close to climax himself. Before he was there, though, he pulled out and flipped her over onto her belly, roughly pulling her thighs against his own as he shoved a pillow beneath her. Fuck yes, ride me hard, baby, Vivian called to him as he moaned aloud and gripped her hips tightly in his oversized palms. Oh, damn, Viv, he groaned as he drove deep. He winced and his head flew back as he began to pump hard and fast into her, a man on the brink of erotic torment. She took his way and pushed her bottom back against him in a beautiful, harmonious rhythm. Her hand fell between her legs, and she stroked herself where they were joined. Oh, God, he cried as she moaned again in orgasm, and this time he came with her, practically roaring as he tumbled to, his entire body jerking as he continued to thrust into her and withdrew until finally he slowed to a halt. He rested his heavy body against her for a moment before pulling out and coming to lay down beside her. Buck grinned that big sexy grin of his as he pulled her into his chest. She stroked at the spattering of hair there and timidly looked down as he moved a stray strand of hair from her cheek.
"You're amazing, in case you didn't already know," he stated.
"You're just saying that," Viv chided him.
"But Jenkins don't say anything." Don't just say anything. Besides, I already made my way into your bed. What more could I gain from blowing smoke up your ass?"
She threw her head back and laughed at his use of words. "Touché," she started to say something else, but couldn't, as his lips crushed hers. She moaned as his tongue moved across her own, and he deepened the kiss. Then, as his hand fell down her arm to her waist, his hand gently cupped her breast, and he kneaded it hungrily. "Oh, Buck," she murmured, as his lips moved to her jaw, then her neck.
"God, you're so damn gorgeous, especially when you fall apart."
She felt her cheeks flame even as his hand moved between her legs, and she gasped. Yes." She breathed out at his fingers as his fingers moved in her wetness once again, and she instinctively opened her thighs for him, wrapping one leg around his hip. He began thrusting two thick fingers into her as she whimpered again and gripped his large shoulder.
"What do you want me to do to you, baby?"
"I want to ride you," she said, reaching for his manhood. He chuckled, then gasped as... Do you know how hard it is to say that word, gasped? Gasped. That's really hard to say. As she gripped, think about how often we say it in the normal language. We don't. We read it. We don't hardly ever say it. He moaned and gasped as she tormented his rock-hard flesh with her hands and eyes. Soon she was guiding the velvety soft tip of him inside her, and he was the one whimpering this time. "Ooh, your cock feels so good inside me," she cooed to him. His eyes found hers as she impaled herself on him slowly, taking her tip to torment him. He growled, and her eyebrow arched as her thighs moved. They both moaned together as she came down hard on him. He took the hat off his head then and plopped it down on hers as her hands splayed across his broad, hard chest and chiseled abs.
"Might as well have a hat if you're going to ride, sexy lady,"
he said as his hands moved to her hips, guiding her up and down on him. Soon she was panting as pleasure began to swirl through her center where his big sex filled her, and her head was thrown back as she moved herself on him unabashedly.
"Yeah, baby girl,"
Buck says, spurring her on as his massive hand sought her breast once again.
"Give it to me. Show your cowboy how crazy he makes you."
Vivian arched her hips as she climbed higher and higher, seeking oblivion. His lips found her nipple and pulled it back into his hot mouth as his hips thrust hard against hers. She felt herself edging closer and closer to climax, cries tearing forth from her lips as she rode him for all she was worth. She whimpered again and again as their rhythm propelled them onward. Suddenly, Buck flipped her once again, easily picking her up and putting her down beside him, her back against his hard chest. His knee moved her legs apart, and she felt him thrust into her in one smooth motion as one of his hands moved underneath her. His palm moved across her chest to hold her to him as he cupped her breast, his other hand coming down her waist, her belly, her thigh, and in between, settling on her sensitive bud. "Oh, Buck," she gasped as he tucked her knee behind his and his mouth fell to her neck to tenderly kiss her pulse point as he withdrew.
"Oh, baby,"
he murmured against her throat as he lunged harder and deeper inside her. She cried out as hot spasms licked through her center, and he fondled her breast like his life depended on it.
"Oh, I just can't get enough of your sweetness," he
He arched his hips sharply, slamming into her, and she pressed herself down onto him, gripping his large thighs with her fingernails.
You're so fucking sexy, he moaned. Shit, Viv, I'm gonna come again.
Yes, come for me, handsome.
You first, darling.
She whimpered as his fingers strummed across her aching flesh with amazing accuracy, and she fell into oblivion again, screaming out his name once more.
God, baby, you feel so damn good and wrapped around my cock,
he murmured. He bit gently into her shoulder and slammed his hips violently into hers over and over. His big body jarred hers as he spilled himself inside her once again.
Oh, baby, oh, fuck yeah,
he cried as his body jerked and his ragged breath grunted in her ear. She grinned, pleased she had him in such a stupor. His hands moved over her thigh, then her waist, lovingly stroking her as he gently continued to fuck her, his orgasm slowly subsiding.
Damn, Viv, you're sexy as hell,
he murmured as he kissed her shoulder and up her neck. She moved her head to rest her face against his as her womanhood continued to clench around his sex. He gasped in response and kissed her jaw.
You probably hear that a lot, I'm sure.
Vivian wouldn't correct him and tell him she'd never had mind-blowing sex quite like this before. Not ever. But there were things he just didn't need to know. His ego was already swelled to bursting as it was. Grab me some more champagne, then I'll show you, sexy. His brow arched at the words, and she giggled at how curious he became by her unknown promise.
Anything my naughty cowgirl wants with an attitude like that.
Buck took his time letting his sex soften as he continued to stroke her naked flesh, then pulled away and refilled their glasses as she propped herself on her side to watch him. Her eyes fell over his massive build, his sexy muscled back, and firm butt cheeks as he faced away from her, and she could feel the stirrings of arousal return as he moved back to the bed and took a seat facing her. Buck handed her a full half-flute of champagne as she sat up, and her eyes roved over his shaggy, thick blonde hair and down his face, stopping at his lips before falling down his chest, then back into those dazzling sky blue eyes. She grinned as he appeared suddenly unnerved by her appraising eyes, sipping from his glass. She reached out and stroked his forearm, up his big bicep, gripping the massive muscle, her insides swirling in pleasure again. He guzzled his drink down and looked at her as he pulled the glass down, waiting for her to say something. She threw the champagne back and downed it in one swallow, tossing the glass aside. Now you're mine, cowboy, she murmured as she moved next to him on the bed. He chuckled as he watched her come in front of him and move her body over his. Do these people not know I'm reading? Her mouth started at his, her lips sipping at his, then moved down his broad chest, licking and sucking and kissing until he was shivering. She giggled as her tongue teased at the hard plane of muscles on his belly, and he gasped.
Viv,
he whimpered as her hands moved down his hips and over his cock hard once again.
I don't know if I...
We're about to find out, aren't we? She murmured as he reached up to pull the silver comb from her hair. Her blonde hair fell, framing her face as she looked up at him.
Fuck, you're gorgeous.
I want to know how that comb kept her hair up there, because I could put a comb in my hair when it was long. I could do this and it'd fall. I thought I was sexy. Make up your mind, Mr. Gridiron Legend. She puckered her lips at him as she came to her knees, and he practically growled. She grinned.
You're both for damn sure.
She chortled. We'll see about that. Her head fell then as she heard Buck gasp.
Viv,
Tell me how sexy I am now, she murmured as her lips fell on the head of his member and kissed the velvet tip lightly.
oh shit!
Buck swore and moaned as his fingers fell gently into her hair and his head flew back. How sexy am I now, with my mouth around you? Buck swore as her mouth encompassed the head of his thick, hard sex and moved all the way down to the base of him.
Oh God, that feels fucking amazing.
He breathed out as his hands gripped her hair at the roots. She took nothing as she pleasured him, rewarding his moans with more passion, gaining speed and gripping firmer with both her mouth and her fist as she loved his girthy member with raw abandon. Soon his grip tightened in her hair and he was moving her head into him as he thrust into her stroking mouth and hand.
Oh God, baby, oh.
He cried and she quickly moved back, leaving only her hand to wrap him leaving only her hand to work him as she stuck her chest out and he spilled himself onto her breast, her eyes looking up into his as he did so. When he was done thrashing hard against her ample bosom and had come down from his sexual high, his smirk was back and he laughed on a sigh.
Jesus, Viv, that was about the hottest fucking thing I'd ever had done to me.
She arched a brow and continued to stroke him, loving how he shivered and jerked when her fingertips traced the head of him. She stated simply. Vivian moved away then to go clean herself off, and when she returned to the bed, Buck had the champagne glasses full again. She smiled at his gorgeousness propped up against the overstuffed down pillows. He was the very definition of sexy himself, laying there with his naked, larger-than-life athlete's body sprawled out beyond comfortable in his own skin. She took the glass extended before her.
I've realized what we need to toast to a night of unfucking believable sex.
He clinked his glass against hers and drank deeply.
Now I don't know about you,
he stated, grinning as if he had some secret,
but I've worked up quite an appetite. Want to order some room service?
Vivian nodded and went over to find the menu as Buck refilled his glass. I reckon we need another bottle of this stuff, too, she scowled as he poured the last of it into his flute. Vivian laughed. For the next hour, they talked and laughed and dined on scrumptious crab cakes and shrimp cocktail, chicken cordon bleu, and truffle mac and cheese while they drank another bottle of the delicious champagne they both loved. Vivian told Buck about the movies she was working on and how excited she was for the roles she fought hard for. And Buck told her about his work with disabled children, the foundation he had set up for cancer research, and how he had moved back home in the last year. They talked about Natalie and Jack and the Kenson kids they both adored. Then Buck's eyes took on a sadness to them that stilled Vivian's breath, and he looked away.
Buck.
Oh, Buck, where'd you go? Vivian took his square jaw in her palm and moved his head back towards her. His blue eyes sparkling like diamonds in the dimly lit room amid the gold-tasseled throw pillows and comforter. He gave her a quivering grin, and before he could respond, she was pressing her lips softly to his. Vivian deepened the kiss and moved closer, aligning her body to his. Hey, if I forget to tell you, thank you for making my night much better than I've ever thought it could be, she murmured. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and he made love to her then. It was different than even the first time, and definitely different than the second. He held her tight in his arms as he laid her back and pushed himself deeply inside her, looking into her eyes as his sex and hands loved her body once again, claiming her for his taking. They climaxed together, and when they finished, he stayed inside her. He moved slightly, just enough to take his weight off of her, but still held her snug within his embrace, and they fell asleep that way. And I'm going to stop there, because that's a good stopping spot. So, what does everybody think? Did you like it? Was it good? Was it bad? What was it? I loved it. Drew, you gotta go get the book. And Shanna told me that these books, even though they're in a series, they are standalones. So you can just go get this book if you want to. You don't have to go get the other three before that and read them. You can just read this one by itself and it'll make perfect sense. You know, it just got some little things in there like they had friends together or whatever, you know. So, it's no big deal. I mean, it probably flows better if you go get the first three. And I'm sure Shanna won't mind you doing that. No, won't hurt her feelings one bit. But, yeah, everybody like it? It releases Friday, so you can go pre-order it now. Whoop, whoop. I got my copy because I'm sweet like that. I know, right? That's what I kept saying. Hot sex, hot sex, hot sex. So, yes. Now then, Nicole, if you can put on there the price and stuff when it comes out, what it pre-orders for, all that good stuff. There are links, girls, on the wall. Nina put them up earlier today. It's probably got the prices and stuff there too. I've just not had time to look too much. So, also tomorrow night will be Miss Lily Black. The first one in her Jaded series. It is an older series. I think she wrote that one in 2015. So, if you've read it, you can come hear me read it and see if it sounds any different than when you read it. Or you can read it for the first time. So come check it out, see what you think, and I'm going to go rest my voice for tomorrow night before my PA decides to kick my tail. All right, ladies. Happy reading. Everybody have a good evening.